Have you ever heard advice to improve your habits or productivity, and then you try it only to find yourself back at square one, maybe within a week or two? I honestly can't even count the number of times I've experienced this myself. And for so long, I would follow advice that was logical, it was well supported, it was vetted by the person sharing the advice. They had tested this, it worked. But when it didn't work for me, I started to assume that I was the problem somehow. That is until I started to embrace this idea of find your kind. And today I'm sharing what I mean when I say find your kind, how it can help you to find momentum you can actually keep, and also what you should be looking for when it comes to who do I take advice from and maybe who do I just let that advice stay for someone else. I'm also going to share an update about my current Instagram experiment and how that's going. We're now 3 weeks into that experiment. So let's start off with the inspiration for this concept. And it really came out of a place of a story by the author Gretchen Rubin. And so Gretchen Rubin, she's written many books, but this book in particular, which is The Four Tendencies, I refer to her work a lot because it is very important about how I understand and how other people understand the context around our reaction to inner and outer expectations. And what was so powerful in this book is a story she told about her earlier book. She had a book called Happier at Home, or Happier and then Happier at Home. And she was doing all these self experiments to try and make her life happier. So she would decide to do something and then follow through with it. And so many of her readers said to her, okay, but how did you get yourself to do those things? And she was genuinely stumped by these questions. She said, well, I decided to do them, so I did them. And she did not understand what people were asking. And she shares this story in the book. And it was such a good example of an author telling us about a blind spot, saying, I had no idea why people were struggling to do the thing they wanted to do. It turns out she is what's called an upholder out of the four tendencies. And that's someone who's very self motivated, self driven. If they say they're going to do something, they do it. And if someone else expects it, they also do it. So it's just not a big struggle for them to take action on something they decide to do. Whereas when she started to develop the four tendencies and talk to more people, she realized there are so many people that resist both inner and outer expectations. That was not her experience. What I love about this and why I'm sharing is that it gave me some insight into an author who gives habit advice. She did write a book about habits after, and she early on when she was sharing her experiences, she just didn't even think that it was an issue for people to follow through. So she wouldn't have asked that question that her audience was asking. And I think that gave me a lot of clarity around paying attention to authors themselves because they are wired differently. They have different experience, different contexts. And so I started to think more and more, who is behind the advice that I am taking or thinking about taking? And can I vet this in advance to make sure that it's well suited towards me and how I naturally operate? And yes, over the years, enough failed things start to give you some hints as to what works. But then I started to think about this idea of find your kind. So notice when somebody else feels familiar to you. And when I say familiar, this could be shared struggles. So somebody who talks about some struggles they've overcome, you might have similar struggles in your life that you are looking to overcome. There's also shared experiences that can go a long way if someone has life experience that is similar to your life experience. And there's also similar context. So, an example is if you are a 40-year-old parent looking for a morning routine, maybe skip the video by the 26-year-old productivity YouTuber. That just might not fit your context or your shared experience. Similarly, if you are someone who's in a 9 to 5 job with a ton of meetings, you're probably not going to be able to embrace monk mode for the next 6 months. Or if you're someone who has ADHD, trying to prioritize work based on its importance and the not urgent but important work, which is what you're supposed to work on, that's probably just not going to work for you. And since I brought it up, I do want to mention the fact that if you have spent any time online, it is safe to say that ADHD content is all over the place. you basically trip over ADHD content when you're on the internet right now. And I think it's for a good reason because there are so many people over the years, whether they were diagnosed or not, the traditional advice was not really working. Saying you should prioritize work that's important but not urgent, that doesn't fly with how someone with ADHD is wired. Their actual brain chemistry just doesn't work that way. So finding other people who have ADHD as well, I think has been really, really helpful. It also helped me to understand that I likely had it, and then it helped me go and actually pursue a formal diagnosis and go down that path. Because the more I heard those stories, the more I thought that really sounds like me. Those are some common struggles that I have had for a very long time. Now, I also think that ADHD content is really popular because a lot of people who even don't have ADHD, or maybe they haven't struggled with it over their life, but they seem to be experiencing a lot of the symptoms. I do genuinely believe that technology is changing our brain chemistry. The amount of time we spend online is changing our dopamine levels, and it's actually causing these dopamine levels to swing more wildly. And then you can end up with these symptoms that are very much mirrored with someone who has lived their whole life with ADHD, and it can cause issues with your attention. And I say that because even if you don't have ADHD, you might find that some of the advice might even be suitable towards you. But regardless, the point that I'm trying to make is every single person giving advice about habits and productivity, myself included, has their own way of working, their own context, their own lived experiences. And when you're listening to advice from others, I want you to pay attention to your internal reaction. Does this sound like it really suits you? Will it fit how you naturally operate? And will it help you to find your flow? Because if not, let it go. Have permission, give yourself permission to just let that go. That advice might work really, really well for someone else, which is wonderful, but don't spend your time trying to fit yourself into something that is not designed for you. And when you do finally find your kind, it does also help you find your flow. It can feel more aligned, and it's something that will flow more naturally. It allows you to find momentum and a rhythm that works for you and something that is more sustainable than trying to push yourself into someone else's idea of what works or what does work for someone else, but it doesn't actually work for you. Speaking of flow, I want to get into sharing a little bit about my current experiment with Instagram. It has been 3 weeks in since I have started posting every single weekday. I take the weekends off on purpose. I want to have some boundaries with social media. And I've been paying a lot of attention to this whole idea of who do I take advice from? And what are things that I know work for me that don't work for other people? And an example of this is me deciding to join an accountability group. Or a challenge. So my friend Chanel has a community that of content creators, and she said, I'm going to run something in September to post whatever you commit to so that you're consistent. So if you want to post every single day, great. If you want to post 3 times a week, great. For me, I decided 5 times a week, every weekday. And that has been helping. And I know this because there are days where I genuinely did not want to post anything. And I started to come up with excuses of, oh, well, it's been a really big day. But I know that I'm in the challenge, and there's actually a tracker, and I want to put the little X beside my name under that day's work. And so that has been driving me. And I know that works for me. And I've shared it countless times of how that external accountability, which if you're not sure, Gretchen Rubin, 4 Tendencies, that is really helpful for me. The other thing I've been doing that has been really helpful for me is asking the question, what would this look like if it were fun? And starting to pay attention to the answers. And I sat down one day with a notebook and just really considered that question. What would this look like if it were fun? Because if I take something too seriously, it starts to feel like a chore. If I feel like I have to do this, then I start to resent it. If I feel like I'm doing this because it's, you know, expectations that don't align with what I actually want, then it can really drag me down. So I'm instead trying to say, okay, one, I am not going to take myself super seriously. I am not going to worry about metrics right now. I just want to focus on getting into the habit of being consistent and also playing around a little bit. And that means trying new things. So, for example, I yesterday decided to create a reel that didn't have my face and was just showing a picture of markers that I bought for the 2 weeks 6 years ago that I thought bullet journaling was going to change my life forever. I knew it was kind of related to what I was talking about today, where I was trying to embrace something that was just did not fit my brain and did not work for me. But it was just a totally different type of reel or short form content that I have ever made before. I'm just not hanging on too tight. If the results are not what I expect, then that's fine. Instead, when I think what would make this fun, it's the ability to experiment, to be creative, but also feel like I'm talking to a friend. What would I want to send a friend? What would I want to say to a friend? And just not putting a ton of pressure on myself right now to get it perfect. That doesn't mean I'm not learning though. So I am seeking out creators that teach some of the different so the concepts around what works, what doesn't, explaining some of the algorithmic changes that have happened over time, taking a look at how I'm setting myself up. So I do still want to continue to improve, but right now, my focus is on just getting into that consistent habit because that's just my start. I just want to be in action. And then as I get used to it, then I will start to tweak and refine and play around with things like how do I, capture someone's attention in the first few seconds who's never met me. So there are things I'm still paying attention to. So that I'm taking it seriously enough, but not so seriously that I resent it. The other thing that's really important for me with this experiment is paying attention to the biology and, in particular, the time of day and my energy levels. So, early on, when I was creating, kind of setting up my method, I wanted to have a nice big block of time. So, I said for an hour in the afternoons, knowing that that's maybe when I'm a little bit more distracted and might be a good time to create on my phone. However, what I have found is that I sort of earmarked it later in the afternoon around 3 when I really start my mind starts to wander. But so many of the days it would actually the day would get away from me and then all of a sudden I am making a reel at, 5 p.m. and I don't want that. And it also doesn't feel like a good fit. My energy is really starting to flag, and that's probably why I'm starting to get distracted around that time of day. So I think what I'm going to try instead is a still afternoon, but right after lunch. And that is usually a time of day I work, I'm self-employed. I work out of my home. I am by myself. And after lunch, I often want to be able to talk to someone. That morning is nice and quiet, and I'm doing a lot of focused work. And then later in the day, I do have that a little bit more, I don't know, chatty energy. Maybe that's why I love this so much, is that I can actually chat to people when I'm recording these podcasts live on Wednesdays. All that to say, I'm going to play around with that. That's another part of the experiment and see how does my energy actually go. And also, when am I feeling good about the content and is this actually fun? And again, when I'm taking advice, I want to take advice from people that suit me. If someone says, hey, batch all of your content, and I know from experience that batching a whole bunch of content just does not work well for me, I'm going to let that advice be for someone else and look for other people who have advice that I know is going to help me find my flow. And I do that through finding my kind.